it's a pleasure to have all of you with me. I'm looking at a March 22nd, 2023 article, which indicates that small business had paid at that time a total of $22 billion, that's not an M, that's a B, in federal carbon tax. Now I'm looking at a February 20th, 24 article, which indicates that the federal government scaled back their carbon tax rebates for small business. And in fact, that the federal government owed small businesses $2.5 billion in promised carbon tax revenues, which as of this date and this article have not been returned to small business. Now, I recognize, Ms. Pullman, your organization estimates that small businesses contribute as much as 40% of the government's overall carbon price revenue, even though data from your organization indicates that 52% of small firms oppose carbon pricing, and that as a result of this carbon pricing, they're being forced to raise prices for consumers. And over 4 in 10, 45%, said it will increase pressure on them to freeze, cut salaries and wages, something that supposedly parties within this room would like to see maintained or improved. And over 40% say they will have to reduce investment in their businesses. Now, we know that this government likes to perpetuate the lie that the carbon tax is even carbon neutral, never mind that families are losing funds as a result of this carbon tax, as was evidenced by the testimony of the parliamentary budget officer who gave testimony to this committee to that effect. So, Ms. Pullman, would you agree that this is not true as well for small businesses in Canada, that they are in fact losing money with the carbon tax, and that in fact they are owed money by this federal government, and that these cuts to the carbon tax should not be implemented because of the $22 billion that's already been collected, the $2.5 billion that was promised back to them, which is yet to be received? Can you comment on that, please, Ms. Pullman?
Yes, certainly. I think we've been very vocal about the fact that the $2.5 billion that's been sitting with government since 2019 is owed back to small businesses, and it is only a fraction. That's based on about 8 or 9% of the total revenues coming in. And as you stated, our calculations are it's closer to 40% of the revenues that come from small businesses that make up carbon revenues in the provinces in which it exists.
That's insane.
And we believe that they've just lowered the amount that they're going to provide to small businesses from 9 to 5% and giving it to other groups for a variety of reasons. So yeah, it's become a real drag for many small business owners right now who are feeling the pinch and not feeling
you get 5% back.
Necessarily being considered when it comes to
crazy.
Tax, though they pay a lot of it. So we're hoping to see some movement.
And they haven't even got the 5%.
Indeed. I think
so
a
they've
real
got zero
drag is an
so
understatement. I'm very proud to come from a small business family, and I know the stress around the dinner table if the store has had a bad day, and I can't imagine the stress of the carbon tax and all these millions of Canadians. We know this government has not been a friend to small business. For example, the 2017 tax changes they made an attempt to implement. This is just another example of that. Mr. Ricco, you said in your opening statement that according to the SME Regulatory Compliance Cost Report, the total regulatory compliance cost to small businesses was nearly $5 billion in 2011, which at the time was approximately $3,500 per business. Would you have any idea how much of this would have been carbon tax related?
I don't have any idea, Ms. Kusie, but what I can say about those compliance costs is that that's because there's different requirements and different processes in different jurisdictions, and the fact that a lot of our members who are SMEs that takes them over a year or two just to be able to get a permit, that creates a hindrance to be able to do business. And so from our perspective, like that ties into the fact that we're not getting things built done in Canada. And if we're not getting things built done in Canada, then we're not spurring economic growth. And from our standpoint, I think that requires what I tied it to my earlier remarks is that we need ambition in order to drive economic growth. Ambition without action, from our perspective, leads to empty economic promises, and we won't reverse our investment trends. So if you look at we're the second worst in the OECD in terms of business investment, we're almost near the bottom in terms of research and development spending. That all adds into the fact that if we don't have a proper level playing field for businesses to succeed, we won't be able to reduce the cost of doing business and supporting innovation.
Mr. Greer, do you have any comments to add on behalf of manufacturers and exporters relative to the effect of the carbon tax on the people you represent, please?
I would just add that manufacturers are generally facing a very high cost, high pressure environment at the moment, and it's cumulative, so it is certainly tax, as we're discussing here today, regulatory burden and all of the costs identified and maybe not captured in federal processes. There's certainly the issue of incentives for manufacturing investment and the pressures coming from the U.S. through the Inflation Reduction Act, not to mention that inflation also impacts all of the inputs that manufacturers require to produce products. So it's a very challenging environment for manufacturers, and it's really all of those factors that are driving anxiety among the industrial sector.
Mr. Swans, anything to add as my time comes to a close in 15 seconds?
Thank you. I think the piece on the carbon tax is to ensure that Canadian companies have a competitive footing in a world, right, in a global economy. Not all jurisdictions have such a tax. How are Canadians being equally treated in a global economy? And that's really one of the big pieces around regulations that impact trade. How do we justify an internal regulation that makes us uncompetitive on the global stage?
Indeed. Testimony from families and small businesses, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.